Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Indian Express Explained section starting from 10th of July 2022 to 17th of July 2022. We shall also be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 17th of July 2022 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on your screen. Time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. The first article for today's analysis has been taken from the Indian Express Explained section. The article is titled as Fasal Bima, Who's In, Out and Why. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian Economy. This article highlights that the government of Andhra Pradesh, which had earlier opted out of the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, has finally decided to rejoin this particular scheme. In this regard, this particular article discusses as to which all states are still outside the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana and why these states have decided to remain outside this particular scheme. So, as far as your UPSC examination is concerned, from the perspective of the prelims examination, one should be aware about the salient features of this particular scheme. And as far as the mains examination is concerned, you should be aware about the critical analysis of this particular scheme. And as you can see, in prelims 2016, we had a direct question related to this particular scheme. And in mains 2016, the question was, given the vulnerability of Indian agriculture to the vagaries of nature, discuss the need for the crop insurance and bring out the salient features of the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. So what we will do here is, as part of this particular article, we will look into the salient features of the scheme, what all changes had the government introduced in the year 2020, and what are the present concerns and challenges with respect to this particular scheme. So based upon our discussion of these aspects, you should be in a position to attempt these three prelims questions for practice. Further, you also have a mains question for practice. The question here is, despite completing 5 years, the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana continues to be plagued by multiple challenges and concerns. Discuss. So let us first look into the salient features of the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. See, in case of India, almost around 86% of the farmers are small and marginal farmers. So these farmers as such, they own less than 2 hectares of agricultural land. Since the overall financial viability of the small and marginal landholdings is quite poor, the small and marginal farmers face multifaceted risk. Secondly, even today, almost around 52% of the agricultural land is rain-fed, that is dependent on monsoons. And we all know that because of the growing climate change problem, there is a greater variability in the monsoons, which in turn puts additional risk on the Indian farmers. Hence, in order to protect the farmers from such kind of risk, there is a need for a kind of insurance scheme. That is where the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana comes into picture. This scheme as such was launched as a centrally sponsored scheme in the year 2016 in order to reduce the risk of the cultivation and to encourage the farmers to undertake investment in the Indian agriculture. So this scheme seeks to provide insurance coverage to the farmers, and please do understand here that this particular scheme covers almost all the farmers, including even the tenant farmers as well as the sharecroppers. Now with respect to what kind of risks are covered under this particular scheme, that is on account of what kind of losses are the farmers provided with the insurance under this particular scheme. So here some of the risks which are covered include prevented sowing. Now prevented sowing basically means that on account of inadequate rainfall, if the farmer is unable to undertake the cultivation of crops, then whatever losses which the farmers incurs, such losses can be compensated under this particular scheme. Apart from that, upon cultivation of crops, the farmers may incur yield losses on account of droughts, floods, pests, diseases, or post-harvest losses. Even such losses also are covered under this particular scheme. Further, the central government has also stated that even the losses which takes place due to attack by the wild animals can also be covered under this particular scheme. But here, the state governments have been given the necessary flexibility or the option whether they want to cover the attack by wild animals under this particular scheme or not. At the same time, the losses on account of war or nuclear risk are not covered under this particular scheme. Since it is an insurance program, the farmers are required to pay a certain percentage of the premium. Now the premium here, as far as the Kharif crops is concerned, it is 2%. For Rabi crops, it is 1.5%. And for commercial and horticultural crops, it is 5%. Further, in the year 2020, the government of India had made some important changes with respect to this particular scheme. So what we will do here is, we will first understand with respect to this premium contribution by the farmers, by the center and the states, and then we'll understand as to what changes were introduced in the year 2020. Now let's say there is a particular district in the state of Maharashtra. In this particular district, let's say we would want to provide for the insurance coverage for a particular Kharif crop in an irrigated area. And let's say the total insurance cover which we would want to provide to a farmer is rupees 1 lakh, which means whatever losses which the farmer incurs, the maximum amount of money which the farmer can claim as an insurance is around 1 lakh. And let's say the total premium which is to be paid is around 40%. So 40% of the total insurance cover of rupees 1 lakh, it would be rupees 40,000. So let's understand as to how this particular scheme used to work before 2020 and after 2020, particularly with respect to the contribution by the farmers, center and the states. So as I said earlier, with respect to Kharif crops, the farmers would have to make a contribution of 2%, for Rabi crops 1.5%, and for the commercial and horticultural crops, the farmers are required to make a contribution of 5%. So as you can see, in case of Kharif crop, it is 2%. So in this case, the farmers would pay 2% of the premium. So out of the total 40% premium, 2% premium would be paid by the farmers. The remaining premium, that is 38%, would be contributed by both center as well as states in equal proportion, which means 19% would be contributed by the center and 19% would be contributed by the concerned state government. So here, earlier what used to happen was, both center and state used to make equal contribution to this particular premium after deducting the farmer's share. So here the farmer's share of 2% is deducted, the remaining share is 38%, and this 38% was contributed by both center and state in equal proportion. More importantly, there was no limit on the contribution by the center and states. For example, if this premium is say 50%, in that case 2% premium would be paid by the farmer, so remaining would be 48%. So out of this 48%, 24% premium would be paid by the center and remaining 24% would be paid by the respective state government. So with respect to this contribution by center and state, there was no limit earlier. So in this case, as you can see, farmers would make a contribution of 2%. So here they would make a contribution of rupees 2,000. Center would make a contribution of 19,000. State government would make a contribution of 19,000. So if you add up these three values, it will come down to rupees 40,000, which is actually the premium which is to be paid. So this was in existence before 2020. Now let's understand as to what changes have been introduced after the year 2020. The most important change here is, earlier as I discussed, there was no limit on the contribution by the central government. But now the center has decided to put a limit on its contribution, wherein according to the center, it would contribute its half only when the premium is 25% in the irrigated areas and up to 30% in the unirrigated areas. So in case if the premium is about 25% in the irrigated areas and about 30% in the unirrigated areas, then the additional premium burden would be borne by the respective state government. So after 2020, what has happened is the amount which is to be contributed by the farmer, that has not got changed. But how much amount the central government would contribute, on this we have put a limit. So whatever is the additional burden, that additional burden is going to fall entirely on the respective state government. So this is little complicated. So let me explain this through a simple example. Now let's say here the premium is 40%, and as I said, the central government has said that it would contribute its 50%, that is half, only when the premium is up to 25% in the irrigated areas. So here we are talking about providing insurance cover to a kharif crop in an irrigated area. So as usual here, the farmers would contribute 2%. Remaining contribution of 38% would have to be paid by the government. So in this case, as I said, the central government would contribute its half only when the premium is up to 25%. So here, the central government considers that the premium is around 25%. So out of which the farmer has paid 2% premium. So remaining is 23%. So here, half of 23%, that is 11.5% only, will be contributed by the central government. So as you can see earlier, the central government was paying 19% of the contribution, but now it is paying only 11.5% of the contribution. So the remaining 26.5% of the contribution will be paid by the respective state government. Similarly, let's say the premium is 50%. Out of this 50% premium, 2% premium would be paid by the farmer. Then as far as the central government is concerned, it would contribute its half only when the premium is up to 25% in the irrigated areas. So here it will contribute only up to 11.5%. So the entire remaining premium burden will fall on the state government. So once again, as you can see, earlier the central government was paying entire 24%, but now the central government will pay only up to 11.5% and not above 11.5%. So accordingly, here the farmers would make a contribution of 2,000. The central government would make a contribution of 11,500 and the state government would make a contribution of the remaining 26,500, which once again, if you add up these three, would come to rupees 40,000. So as far as the central government's contribution is concerned, the central government would contribute its half only when the premium is up to 25% in the irrigated areas and up to 30% in the unirrigated areas. So this is the most important change which the central government has introduced in the year 2020. The second most important change here is, earlier if you see, that is before 2020, the enrollment under the Pradhan Fasal Bima Yojana was mandatory for the loany farmers. The loany farmers means basically those farmers who take loans from the banks. So for the farmers who have taken loans from the banks, it was mandatory. And for the non-loany farmers, that is the farmers who have not taken the loans from the banks, from these categories of farmers, enrollment under the Pradhan Fasal Bima Yojana was not mandatory. But now what has happened is, after the year 2020, we have made the enrollment under the Pradhan Fasal Bima Yojana voluntary for both loany farmers as well as the non-loany farmers. So as far as the non-loany farmers is concerned, earlier also enrollment under the scheme was voluntary. Even now, enrollment under the scheme is voluntary for them. But when you look at the loany farmers, that is the farmers who have taken loans from the banks, earlier for them it was mandatory to get enrollment under this particular scheme. It was mandatory for them to make a contribution of the premium, which is say 2%, 1.5% and 5% depending upon the nature of crops. But now we have made it voluntary even for the loany farmers as well. But despite completing more than 5 years, the Pradhan Fasal Bima Yojana is suffering from multifaceted challenges. So let us look into these challenges one by one, starting with poor awareness among the farmers. According to some of the estimates, only around 30% of the farmers are aware about the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, which in turn has led to low enrollment of the farmers under this particular scheme. For example, according to the government estimates, the government receives almost around 5 crore applications from the farmers every year under this particular scheme. But if you look at the number of farmers who are enrolled under the PM Kisan scheme, which provides for a transfer of rupees 6,000 on an annual basis to the farmers, under this PM Kisan scheme, the government itself has recognized almost around 14.5 crore farmers. So as you can see, out of these 14.5 crore farmers which are presently covered under the PM Kisan, the government is receiving applications only from 5 crore farmers under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. So to a large extent, there is poor awareness among the farmers with respect to this particular scheme. The second most important problem which we can cite here is, so this particular scheme is covering both tenant farmers and sharecroppers. So ideally, we should have brought in more tenant farmers and sharecroppers under the ambit of this particular scheme. But unfortunately, a large number of sharecroppers and tenant farmers are not covered under this scheme. Secondly, every year, the state governments are required to notify the crops that would be covered under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. And only for those crops which are notified by the respective state government, the farmers can claim insurance. But normally it has been seen that the coverage of the crops by the state governments under this particular scheme is quite lower. So if less number of crops are covered under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, then obviously the farmers would not grow those crops which are not part of the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. So this in turn hinders the agricultural diversification in the Indian agriculture. So farmers would continue to grow only those crops which are notified by the state government, and they would not grow other crops which are not notified by the state government. So this in a way will hinder the agricultural diversification. The third one here is, as I said earlier, the state governments and the central government are required to make contribution to avail the benefits under this particular scheme. Normally it is seen that there is huge delay in the payment of premium by the respective state government, which in turn discourages the farmers from availing the benefits under this particular scheme. The next important aspect is with respect to high premium rates under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, which in turn is putting higher financial burden on center as well as states. One of the reasons as to why the central government decided to limit its contribution in the year 2020 was because of this high premium rates only. So if the premium rates are higher, obviously it is going to become costly for the farmers, for the center as well as states to avail the insurance benefit. The next important problem is with respect to large scale delays in the payment of insurance claim to the farmers by the insurance companies. And the last and most important is reluctance of some of the state governments to join this scheme. So this particular article highlights that almost around 5 states across India have not joined the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. Some of these state governments include West Bengal, Telangana and so on. So these state governments as such have raised a number of concerns with respect to Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. For example, some of the state governments have raised concerns with respect to lack of operational flexibility with respect to implementing this particular scheme. For instance, earlier, the government of Andhra Pradesh had decided to withdraw from the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana because it felt that it did not have necessary operational flexibility with respect to what kind of risk can be covered under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. The second important problem is with respect to the demand of some of the state governments such as Bihar that the farmers should not be required to pay any premium to claim the benefits of this particular scheme. So as I said, the farmers are required to pay certain amount of premium which ranges from 1.5% for the rabi crops to 5% for the commercial and horticultural crops. But some of the state governments such as Bihar want that even this particular premium which is paid by the farmers should be completely waived off and the entire premium should be paid by both center as well as states. However, the central government is opposed to such a proposal by the Bihar government because it will put more additional financial burden on the government. And the last and most important problem here is growing politicization of the centrally sponsored schemes, including the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. For example, the government of West Bengal is presently not implementing this particular scheme because if it has to implement this particular scheme, then it would have to use the word Pradhan Mantri in its scheme, which would in a way give more credit to the central government and not credit to the concerned state government. So because of such kind of politicization, West Bengal government has decided not to join the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. So these are some of the important challenges and concerns with respect to this particular scheme. So based upon our understanding, please have a look at these 3 practice questions and please let me know the answer in the comment section given below. Further, also please try writing answer to this particular mains question for practice. The next article is titled as Punjab's Moong MSP Experiment, Its Impact on State Finances. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian Economy. As far as the mains examination is concerned, from this particular article, one should be aware about various aspects of the agricultural diversification in the Green Revolution states, that is, its need, challenges, and strategies. Further, as you can see, in mains 2018, there was a direct question related to the minimum support price. The question was, what do you mean by the minimum support price? How will the MSP rescue the farmers from the low income trap? So based upon our discussion, a mains question for your practice here could be, the present agrarian crisis in the Green Revolution states can be countered only through the diversification towards high value crops and the promotion of secondary agriculture, argue. So here, let's understand various facets of this particular article. I hope all of you must be knowing that the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs declares the minimum support price for almost around 22 major agricultural commodities. If you add the sugarcane, for which we declare the FRP, then the MSP would cover 23 agricultural commodities. So the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs declares the MSP for different crops such as rice, wheat, pulses, oilseeds, and so on. This is declared based upon the recommendations of the Commission on Agricultural Cost and Prices. But as you know, even though we declare MSP for 22 major agricultural commodities, the procurement as such is strong only for rice and wheat. This is so because the rice and wheat as such is procured by the Food Corporation of India for the distribution through the network of fair price shops under the National Food Security Act, because of which the procurement mechanism for the other category of agricultural commodities such as pulses, oilseeds is quite lower. And since it is quite lower, most of the time pulses and oilseeds, they are normally sold in the market at below the minimum support price. Hence, in order to promote agricultural diversification in the state of Punjab, the Punjab government has come up with a new policy. Under this particular policy, the Punjab government has stated that it will procure the Moong at the minimum support price which is declared by the center. So whatever is the MSP which the center declares for Moong, that is green gram, at that particular MSP, the Punjab government would procure the Moong from the farmers. Now the question is, why is Punjab government focusing on cultivation of Moong? Now if you look at the overall time taken for cultivation and harvesting of Moong, it is quite lower at 60 days. So basically it is a short duration crop. Since it is a short duration crop, Moong as such can be grown in the gap between the harvest of wheat and sowing of paddy. So normally wheat in the state of Punjab is harvested in the second or third week of April, and paddy is grown after the onset of the monsoon season. So since there is a gap of almost around 60 days, this particular gap can be better utilized for growing of short duration crops such as the Moong or the green gram. Apart from that, the Punjab government has also laid certain stringent conditions for the procurement of Moong. For example, the Punjab government has said that only that particular green gram which is of good quality, which means say like it is having low moisture content or having grains of adequate size, only good quality Moong or the green gram would be procured by the Punjab government. Apart from that, another stringent condition laid on by the Punjab government is once the farmers cultivate and harvest Moong, this cultivation and harvesting of Moong should be in turn followed by the sowing of certain varieties of paddy. Now, these varieties of paddy should be actually early maturing and less water consuming. For example, the Punjab government has stated that once the Moong is harvested, it should be followed by sowing of PR 126 variety of paddy, which is actually early maturing and consumes less amount of water as compared to the other varieties of rice. In this regard, let us look into the benefits of this particular policy announced by the Punjab government. See, right now, it is being stated that in the green revolution states such as Punjab and Haryana, almost around on 80% of the agricultural land, only two crops are grown, that is rice and wheat. So the green revolution states have come to be dominated by the monocropping. Hence, by assuring the farmers that whatever Moong which they cultivate, that would be procured, the Punjab government is in a way trying to promote agricultural diversification. To a certain extent, the success of this particular policy is evident in the fact that this year there has been a overall increase in the area under Moong by almost around 77%. So large number of farmers have taken up the cultivation of Moong because of this particular policy of the Punjab government. Secondly, the over cultivation of rice and wheat, as you know, has led to the over exploitation of the groundwater, and it has also led to decline in the soil fertility. So if this particular policy continues in future and if this becomes a success, then this can help us promote sustainable agricultural practices in the green revolution states, and it will help us address the second generation problems that are normally attributed to the green revolution. Third and most important part here is if you look at the farmers in Punjab and Haryana, obviously they are rich and prosperous. But if you look at their overall annual growth in the income levels, their annual growth in the income levels is hardly around 1% in comparison to 3% annual growth rate for the farmers at an all India level. So even though the farmers in Punjab and Haryana may be earning more amount of money, but the rate at which their income levels has been increasing, it is quite lower. At an all India level, the farmers' income is increasing at 3%, whereas in case of Punjab and Haryana, the income level is increasing by just 1%. Similarly, if you look at the per hectare yield of the farmers in Punjab and Haryana, from 1 hectare, the farmers in Punjab and Haryana are earning just 1.5 lakhs, whereas an average farmer in other states such as Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, they are earning much higher at almost around 2.25 lakhs. See, all of these facts and figures have been highlighted by well-known agricultural scientist Mr. Ashok Gulati. So, in his article in the Indian Express earlier, he had highlighted all of these facts and figures to put forward a point that the farmers in case of Punjab and Haryana are losing out because of cultivation of rice and wheat. So it is expected that once we start promoting agricultural diversification towards other crops, automatically the income levels of the farmers in Punjab and Haryana would increase. And last and most importantly, see, presently India is one of the largest producer of pulses in the world. In spite of being a largest producer of pulses, India faces the demand-supply mismatch. For example, even now, we import almost around 20% of our pulses requirements. So, as more number of farmers, especially in states such as Punjab and Haryana, take up the cultivation of pulses, we would be able to reduce this particular demand supply mismatch in pulses. We would be able to control the rising inflation in pulses. We would be able to reduce our imports and control the current account deficit. But at the same time, there are a number of challenges and concerns with respect to this particular policy of the Punjab's government. What are these concerns? First and foremost, according to various newspaper articles, there has been undue delay in the announcement of this particular policy by the Punjab government. Because of this particular delay, fewer number of farmers have taken cultivation of green gram. So that's the first problem. Second problem here is there is a higher risk of cultivation of green gram for the farmers. This is on account of untimely rains. So untimely rains, if they occur, this in turn leads to increase in the moisture content of the green gram, and increase in the moisture content of the green gram will in turn lead to post harvest losses. So because of that higher risk, farmers may not take up the cultivation of the green gram in the long run. The third problem is with respect to low procurement of green gram by the Punjab government. According to newspaper articles, only around 20% of the Moong which has arrived in the market has been procured by the Punjab government. This is on account of the stringent conditions which the Punjab government has stipulated. So stringent conditions such as that the Moong should be of good quality, it should be of low moisture content. So all of these stringent requirements may have forced the farmers to sell the Moong in the open market, that is to the traders, instead of selling it to the Punjab government. So what has happened here is that almost remaining 80% of the green gram has been sold in the market at much below the minimum support price. So almost around 80% of the green gram in case of Punjab has been sold at almost around 30% below the minimum support price. So these are some of the challenges with respect to Punjab's experiment with respect to the MSP for Moong. So what should be the long-term strategies in order to address the agrarian crisis in the Green Revolution states? See here, earlier the Punjab government had appointed a committee under the leadership of Montek Singh Ahluwalia. And as you know, Montek Singh Ahluwalia was earlier deputy chairperson of the Planning Commission. So Montek Singh Ahluwalia committee has given certain recommendations as to what should Punjab do in the long run. So the first recommendation of this particular committee here was that we must try to reduce the overall area under rice, that is paddy, and we must encourage the farmers to take up the cultivation of high value crops, particularly crops such as fruits and vegetables. So this particular committee was of the opinion that the agricultural ecosystem in case of Punjab, so it is well developed in terms of larger land holdings, in terms of access to credit for the farmers, in terms of good marketing infrastructure and so on. So since Punjab has a right agricultural ecosystem, Punjab can take up the cultivation of the high value crops which are far more in demand and which can actually enable the farmers to earn more amount of income levels. So that's the first recommendation. The second recommendation was, see, if farmers shift towards rice and wheat, then in the short run the farmers may incur loss. So here the Ahluwalia committee suggested that in order to compensate for any possible loss because of a sudden shift towards high value crops, the farmers need to be given adequate amount of compensation, for which the central government has to design a special package. Third and most important here is the Punjab government should focus on promotion of secondary agriculture. So what exactly is secondary agriculture? The secondary agriculture includes all the activities which involve supply of various inputs to the Indian agriculture, or which involve usage of agricultural products as raw materials. So either it will supply inputs to agriculture or it will use agricultural products as raw materials. Now with respect to the first dimension, let's say you have certain industries in rural India which are providing seeds, fertilizers, agricultural credit such as say self-help groups, or which provides or the enterprises which provides agricultural machineries on a rental basis to the farmers. So all of these enterprises based in rural India, they provide various agricultural inputs to the farmers. So these activities as such can be considered to be secondary agriculture. Similarly, let's say you have an industry in the rural area and this particular industry is using agriculture products as raw materials. Take for instance the food processing industries located in rural India. So this food processing industry, which is say processing fruits and vegetables which it is buying from the farmers, can also be considered as part of secondary agriculture. So in a nutshell, secondary agriculture includes all the activities which either supply inputs to the Indian agriculture or uses the agriculture products as raw materials. So this particular term of secondary agriculture was actually coined by the Committee on Doubling Farmers' Income, that is Ashok Dalwai. So Montek Singh Ahluwalia committee suggested that the Punjab government should focus upon promotion of secondary agriculture, which will in turn give a boost to the food processing industries in the state of Punjab. It will create the necessary forward-backward linkages with the agriculture and in turn reduce the post-harvest losses. The next recommendation is to promote the cultivation of pulses and oilseeds in Punjab, particularly through the guaranteed procurement under the Pradhan Mantri Annadata is Sanrakshan Abhiyan. So I hope you must be knowing that the PM Asha seeks to promote the cultivation of pulses and oilseeds. Hence, this particular scheme has to be efficiently implemented in the state of Punjab. And last and most importantly, see, farmers in case of Punjab get a large number of subsidies such as the power subsidies, water subsidies, etc., which in turn encourages them to take up the cultivation of rice and wheat. So ultimately, if we have to discourage the farmers from cultivating rice and wheat and promote agricultural diversification, the Punjab government should rationalize various agricultural subsidies. Whatever money we are able to save through the rationalization of subsidies should be in turn used for the diversification and improving the supply chain management. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know as far as this particular article is concerned. Further, here is your mains question for practice. So I have incorporated the suggested answer in terms of introduction, body and the conclusion. So you can pause this particular video, have a look at the suggested answer and later try to write the answer on your own. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article is titled as What the Draft Medical Devices Bill Say and What It Does Not. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, Polity and Governance. See, recently the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has published the draft Drugs, Medical Devices and Cosmetic Bill 2022. Hence, as far as the UPSC examination is concerned, one should be aware about the salient features of the newly proposed bill. See, there is no need for you to get into a lot of details such as the criticisms of the bill and so on, because the bill is right now in the draft stage and the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has invited the public comments or suggestions with respect to this particular bill. So broadly, if you just understand the salient features as of now, that alone would be sufficient. So let's understand the important features of the draft Drugs, Medical Devices and Cosmetic Bill 2022. Starting with, why do we need such a bill in the first place? See, right now we have an act in India known as the Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940. This is a pre-independence era legislation which deals with various aspects related to drugs and cosmetics, such as it relates to import, manufacturing and distribution of drugs and cosmetics. However, this particular law as such has become outdated and has become obsolete. That is why we need a new law in place in order to take into account the modern scientific advancements which are taken place in the field of drugs, cosmetics and medical devices. And that is why we have the new draft bill which has been proposed by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So just like the previous act, this particular bill seeks to lay down a legal framework which will deal with import, manufacture, distribution, and sale of drugs, medical devices, as well as cosmetics. Further, this particular bill also seeks to set up advisory board to advise the central government and state government on all technical matters related to drugs and medical devices. For example, it seeks to set up the Drugs Technical Advisory Board to advise a concerned state government on all matters related to drugs. Similarly, to advise on all technical matters related to medical devices, it seeks to set up the Medical Devices Technical Advisory Board. Further, this particular bill also seeks to set up the testing laboratories. So here it seeks to set up the central drugs testing laboratories for the testing of drugs and cosmetics. On similar lines, it seeks to set up the central medical devices testing centers for the testing of medical devices. For the efficient implementation of this particular act, the bill seeks to set up the drugs controller officers to be appointed by the center and the state. So the role of the drug controller officers would be to ensure that the drugs and medical devices that are being sold in India, they are of superior quality, they are not misbranded, or they are not spurious. So they can actually conduct inspection of the factories and industries where drugs and medical devices are manufactured, so as to ensure that these drugs and medical devices are of superior quality. Then this bill also seeks to regulate the conducting of clinical trials for both drugs as well as medical devices. This bill provides that if any company wants to conduct clinical trials either for drugs or medical devices, then compulsory such a company would have to take the prior approval from the Drugs Controller General of India. It also seeks to set up an ethics committee in order to oversee the conduct of the clinical trials. And last and most importantly, this bill also seeks to provide for the payment of compensation either for injury or death suffered to a person on account of the clinical trials. So if a company is carrying out a clinical trial and in case it causes some adverse impact on the person, which may either lead to his injury or death, then in such cases, such a company would be required to pay adequate amount of compensation. Nextly, India has seen a rapid growth of online e-pharmacies such as Tata's 1mg. However, these e-pharmacies right now are not regulated either under a legal framework, that is the Drugs and Cosmetic Act 1940, or under any other rules formulated by the center. Accordingly, this particular bill seeks to regulate the online e-pharmacies. Nextly, this bill also provides for stringent punishment for manufacture, sale and distribution of adulterated or spurious drugs and medical devices. And last and most importantly, unlike the present Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940, the new bill has incorporated a separate chapter on Ayurveda, Siddha, Sovarikpa and Unani. This bill seeks to establish an advisory board on the traditional Indian medicines to advise the government on all technical matters related to the development of traditional Indian medicines. Further, it also calls upon the government to use the modern science and technology for the development of innovative drugs and devices. Accordingly, this bill seeks to set up the Scientific Research Board in order to develop innovative drugs in the field of Ayurveda, Siddha, Sovarikpa and Unani. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know as far as this particular article is concerned. Now this particular article appears in the Hindu newspaper. The article is titled as Where is the population growth taking place? This article shall be important from the perspective of GS paper 1 under the subsection of population and associated issues. As far as the UPSC examination is concerned, one should be aware about the highlights of the World Population Prospects 2022 report, which is published by the United Nations. And secondly, one should be aware about the demographic transition in India and what policies are needed. These aspects I have already covered in the DNS dated 21st of July 2021. Further, as you can see, in the previous year mains, that is in mains 2021, we had this particular question directly related to population, and based upon our discussion, a mains question for the practice here could be: harnessing demography dividend is considered as a key to realization of $5 trillion economy. In this regard, discuss as to how the government of India has to reorient its socio-economic policies to handle the demographic transition in the next 2 decades. So what we will do is, we'll first look into the major highlights of the World Population Prospects Report 2022. See, recently on July 11, that is when we celebrated the World Population Day, the United Nations came up with the World Population Prospects Report 2022. Now, this particular report has been published by the United Nations since 1951, and as the name suggests, this particular report highlights the overall projections in the world population. The overall population estimation projected in this particular report is quite important because it is used for tracking a number of development indicators by the United Nations, such as the overall progress on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So that is the significance of this particular report. According to this particular report, it highlights that the world population as such continues to grow, but the rate at which the world population is growing, this has slowed down. For example, this report highlights that for the first time since 1950, the global population growth rate has fell down under 1% in the year 2020. So for the first time, the average annual population growth rate at the global level has fallen down to 1%. So that is the most important development which has taken place. So since the average population growth rate has come down, the rate at which the population is growing at the global level, this is also set to reduce. So accordingly, if you look at the future population projections, the world's population is projected to reach almost like 8.5 billion in 2030, then almost like 9.7 billion in 2050, and further it will reach a peak of 10.4 billion in 2080. So once it reaches a peak in the year 2080, it will continue to remain at that particular peak until 2100. Beyond that, we could probably see a decline in the overall population at the global level. Presently, if you look at the major drivers for the global population growth, according to this particular report, even though the overall global fertility rate has come down, the main drivers of the population growth are: 1. Decline in the overall mortality, and 2. Increase in the life expectancy at birth. For example, globally life expectancy at birth has increased by almost 9 years since 1990. Now it has reached 72.8 years in the year 2019. When it comes to the average fertility rate, that is how many children does a woman give birth to during her reproductive age, according to this particular report, the global fertility rate is 2.3 births per woman. So I hope you must be knowing that the replacement level fertility is at 2.1. So replacement level fertility means as to how many children should a woman give birth to, so that the population as such gets stabilized. That means we will neither see a increase nor a decrease in the population. Only the thing which happens is the present generation gets replaced by the future generation. So the replacement level fertility is 2.1, and if you look at the present global fertility rate, it is 2.3. So slowly and over a period of time, by 2050, the global fertility is set to decline to the replacement level fertility of 2.1. Even though the population is growing slowly at a global level, but this report highlights that there is wide disparity with respect to the growth rates witnessed in different regions of the world. For example, in the next 30 years, that is until 2050, more than 50% increase in the global population will be concentrated in just 8 countries, which also includes countries such as India, Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, and Tanzania. And most importantly, according to this particular report, India is projected to surpass China as the world's most populous country in the year 2023 itself. That is right next year. So it was always known that India will surpass China as the world's most populous country. But what is surprising here is, according to this particular report, we will become the world's most populous country just next year itself. This report also highlights that the population in almost around 46 least developed countries is projected to double between 2022 and 2050. On the other hand, population in almost around 61 countries across the world, such as Bulgaria, Latvia, Lithuania, Serbia, Ukraine, etc., are set to reduce by 1% between 2022 and 2050. So as you can see, on one hand, you are seeing a large scale increase in population in basically 8 countries across the world. On the other hand, some of the countries, that is almost like 61 countries across the world, they are going to witness a sharp decline in their population. Further, the report also highlights that countries in sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Asia, Latin America and Caribbean are witnessing demographic dividend, wherein a major chunk of their population is in the working age group. Accordingly, this particular report calls for enhanced human capital formation, particularly in countries such as sub-Saharan Africa, in order to reap the demographic dividend. Further, this report also highlights that we are going to witness an increase in the number of senior citizens, both in terms of absolute value as well as share of total population. So according to this particular report, in terms of the share of total population, the senior citizens share is set to increase from 10% in the year 2022 to 16% in the year 2050. So slowly at a global level, we are going to witness a kind of demographic transition from the working age group to more towards the senior citizens age group. Accordingly, some of the countries which are aging, these countries would have to spend substantial amount of money on providing universal healthcare coverage for their senior citizens. And last and most importantly, this report has also analyzed the impact of COVID-19 on the global population. This report has highlighted that there has been decrease in the global life expectancy at birth from 72.8 in the year 2019, that is just before the COVID-19 pandemic, to 71 in the year 2021. So these are the major highlights of the World Population Prospects Report 2022. Further, as far as this particular report is concerned, we should be aware about the demographic transition in India, as to how the demography in case of India is set to change in the next 2 to 3 decades. Now, all the aspects related to the demographic transition with respect to India I have already covered in much greater detail in the DNS dated 21st of July 2021. So, as you can see here, I have discussed as to how the overall fertility rate in case of India has changed over a period of time and how it has affected the population growth rate. Then I have compared the overall demographic transition in India with respect to the other countries. I have also compared the demographic transition in different states of India. And last and most importantly, I have discussed as to how the government of India has to reorient its socio-economic policies in order to handle the demographic transition in the next 2 to 3 decades. So I would suggest you to go through this particular DNS dated 21st of July 2021 in order to comprehensively understand all the aspects related to the management of demographic transition. Now, the next article also appears on the FAQ page of the Hindu newspaper. The article is titled as Will the RBI Move Help Greater Trade in Rupee? See, as far as this particular article is concerned, already we have covered this particular article in the DNS dated 12th of July 2022. So in this particular article, we have discussed as to how the recent RBI's move to facilitate international trade in rupees works. So those of you who have not gone through this particular article, you can go through the DNS dated 12th of July 2022. Next, similarly, we have another article on the FAQ page with respect to granting of bails. Now, as far as this particular article is concerned, once again, this particular article has been covered in the DNS dated 29th of December 2020. In this particular DNS, we have covered all the aspects related to granting of bail its problems and challenges. So you can go through this particular DNS, the link to which I have provided in the description box below. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day. The answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option D.